The air was thick with tension at the Jefferson Elementary School auditorium. Dozens of parents, most of them wearing expressions of quiet indignation, filled the room. At the center of the controversy stood Mr. Elijah Carter, a tall, composed man with a calm demeanor and an undeniable presence. He was the first black teacher hired at the predominantly white suburban school, and his appointment was met with an unsettling mix of curiosity and resistance. For many, Mr. Carter was an outsider, a man whose teaching philosophy centered not only on academics but also on fostering empathy, understanding, and social awareness. His lessons often went beyond the textbooks, challenging students to think critically about their world. It wasn't long before whispers turned into vocal discontent. "Why does he need to talk about things like race in class?" one parent demanded during a school meeting. Another chimed in, "We just want our kids to learn math and science, not politics." Mr. Carter, however, remained undeterred. He had seen resistance before, and he knew that meaningful change often started with discomfort. His mission was clear: to provide these students with an education that prepared them not just for exams but for life. Despite the uproar, there was one thing that couldn't be denied. His students adored him. They described his classes as eye-opening and exciting. They were learning to think for themselves, question norms, and appreciate diverse perspectives. The parents, however, weren't convinced. The school board called an emergency meeting to address the growing concerns. As Mr. Carter stood before the crowd, the weight of their judgment pressing down on him, he knew this was his moment to speak truth to power. "Education isn't just about facts and figures," he began, his voice steady but passionate. "It's about shaping young minds to be curious, compassionate, and courageous." His words hung in the air, challenging the very foundation of the parents' objections. What happened next would change the community forever, cementing Mr. Carter's place as a legendary figure in the school's history. Despite Mr. Carter's heartfelt speech, the protests didn't stop. In fact, they intensified. Parents formed committees, circulated petitions, and flooded the school board with emails demanding his removal. "He's pushing his agenda on our children," one parent wrote. "We want traditional education, not activism in the classroom." The media caught wind of the controversy, framing it as a clash between progressive education and traditional values. News vans lined up outside the school gates, reporters eager to capture the drama unfolding in this quiet suburban town. Inside the classroom, Mr. Carter continued to teach with unwavering determination. His students were in the midst of a lesson about empathy, a word that many of them had never really considered. He asked them to write about a time they felt misunderstood, and then encouraged them to share their experiences with the class. 12-year-old Emma, who was usually shy, spoke up. "I remember when I started wearing glasses, and everyone called me names. I hated going to school." Another student, Lucas, chimed in, "Yeah, my parents are divorced, and sometimes kids say I'm weird because I don't have a dad around." As more students shared their stories, a remarkable thing happened. They started seeing each other differently. The classroom became a space of understanding and connection. Outside the classroom, however, tensions boiled over. A group of parents picketed in front of the school, holding signs that read, "Let kids be kids and keep politics out of the classroom." Mr. Carter knew he couldn't change every mind overnight, but he believed in the power of small victories. One day, he invited the parents to observe his class. Most declined, but a few curious ones showed up, including Mrs. Thompson, one of his most vocal critics. As she sat quietly at the back of the room, she watched Mr. Carter guide the students through a discussion on teamwork and respect. There were no lectures on politics, no grand statements, just thoughtful conversations that encouraged the kids to think critically and treat each other with kindness. After the class, Mrs. Thompson approached Mr. Carter. "I have to admit, that was different from what I expected," she said reluctantly. The kids seemed engaged. "It's about helping them grow as people," Mr. Carter explained. "Not just as students." The seeds of change were being planted, but resistance remained strong. The school board scheduled a formal hearing to determine Mr. Carter's future at the school. The parents' grievances were laid out in stark detail, but Mr. Carter was given the chance to speak. He didn't defend himself. Instead, he spoke about his students. "They are the future," he said. And if we don't teach them to think for themselves and care for others, then we're failing them. A hush fell over the room. Even those who had been adamantly opposed to him began to question their stance. The hearing ended without a decision, but something had shifted. The parents who had once been united in their opposition were starting to see Mr. Carter in a new light. The turning point began with a simple homework assignment. Mr. Carter asked his students to research someone who had made a positive impact on society despite facing adversity. The assignment wasn't just about facts. It was about understanding resilience and courage. The students dove into the project enthusiastically. Some chose historical figures like Rosa Parks and Nelson Mandela, while others focused on unsung heroes in their own communities. When presentation day arrived, the classroom buzzed with excitement. Emma stood at the front of the room, her voice trembling slightly. I chose my grandfather. He fought in World War II and came home to a country that didn't always appreciate veterans. But he never stopped believing in doing the right thing. Lucas shared a story about a local firefighter who saved lives during a massive blaze, despite being injured. He said bravery is about doing what's right, even when you're scared, Lucas explained. The stories were powerful, but what made them transformative was the realization that struggle and courage were universal. It didn't matter where someone came from or what they looked like. Everyone had the capacity to make a difference. Word about the assignment spread beyond the classroom. Some parents, initially skeptical of Mr. Carter's teaching methods, began to see the value in what he was doing. Mrs. Thompson, who had once led the charge against him, found herself captivated by her son's newfound curiosity and empathy. I don't know what he's doing in that classroom, but my Lucas is more thoughtful now, she admitted to a friend. Still, not everyone was convinced. A faction of parents remained steadfast in their opposition, accusing Mr. Carter of veering away from traditional education. They demanded standardized test scores as proof of his effectiveness. The school principal, Mr. Reynolds, decided to conduct an unannounced observation of Mr. Carter's class. He watched as the students worked in groups, debating ethical dilemmas and supporting their arguments with research and logic. What do you think is the most important quality in a leader? Mr. Carter asked the class. Honesty, one student said confidently. Empathy, added another. Mr. Reynolds was impressed. These were not rote answers. They were thoughtful, well-reasoned responses that demonstrated critical thinking skills far beyond the student's grade level. After class, Mr. Reynolds pulled Mr. Carter aside. I see what you're doing here, he said, and it's working. Keep it up. The investigation into Mr. Carter's teaching methods took a surprising turn when test scores were released. Despite the unconventional lessons, the students had performed exceptionally well, with many showing marked improvements in reading comprehension and problem-solving skills. The news spread quickly, silencing some of Mr. Carter's fiercest critics. Even local media picked up the story, framing it as a testament to innovative teaching methods. But the most significant breakthrough came during a school-wide assembly. The students, inspired by Mr. Carter's lessons, had organized a day of understanding. They invited parents, teachers, and community members to participate in activities designed to foster empathy and communication. One activity involved pairing up with someone you didn't know well and sharing a personal story. Mrs. Thompson found herself sitting across from a mother she had never spoken to before, a woman who had recently moved to the town and faced subtle discrimination. I never realized how hard it's been for you, Mrs. Thompson admitted. Thank you for listening, the woman said, her voice filled with gratitude. By the end of the day, barriers had been broken down, and the community felt more connected than ever before. Mr. Carter watched from the sidelines, a proud smile on his face. He had always believed in the power of education to change lives, and now that belief was becoming a reality. The investigation into his teaching methods concluded with a glowing report. The school board acknowledged his contributions and formally recognized him for his innovative approach to education. But for Mr. Carter, the real victory was seeing his students and their families grow in understanding and empathy. The once divided school community was undergoing a remarkable transformation. Mr. Carter's lessons had ignited a ripple effect far beyond the classroom. Students were not only excelling academically, but also displaying newfound compassion and leadership qualities. Parents who had once protested his presence now spoke of his impact with admiration, though some did so quietly to save face. The school's Day of Understanding had become a turning point, sparking conversations that continued in homes, on playgrounds, and even in local businesses. Lucas, once indifferent to school, had become a champion of inclusivity, organizing a student-led initiative to welcome new classmates and ensure no one felt left out. Mr. Carter taught us that everyone has a story worth hearing, Lucas said during morning announcements, his voice filled with pride. Even Mrs. Thompson, who had been one of Mr. Carter's harshest critics, found herself defending him at a neighborhood gathering. "I was wrong about him," she admitted. "He's not just teaching our kids. He's shaping them into better people." But the real transformation came when the school district invited Mr. Carter to lead a professional development workshop for teachers across the region. His topic? The power of empathy in education. Standing before a room filled with educators, Mr. Carter shared his journey. "I didn't come here to cause controversy," he began. "I came here to teach. But I realized that teaching isn't just about equations and grammar rules. It's about helping students see the world through a broader lens." He spoke about the challenges he had faced, the resistance from parents, and the breakthroughs that had made it all worthwhile. His words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom were grappling with their own struggles to make education more meaningful. Back at Jefferson Elementary, the changes were evident. Students were collaborating more, supporting one another, and taking initiative in their learning. The walls of the school, once adorned with generic posters, now featured student-created murals celebrating diversity and community. One mural depicted a tree with branches reaching toward the sky, each leaf bearing the name of a student. At the base of the tree was a simple inscription, "Growth through Understanding." The school board, recognizing Mr. Carter's contributions, officially named him Teacher of the Year. The announcement was met with thunderous applause at a school assembly. As Mr. Carter accepted the award, he looked out at the sea of faces, students, parents, and colleagues who had once doubted him but now stood united in support. "This isn't just my victory," he said humbly. "It's ours. Because when we choose understanding over fear, we all win." The transformation extended beyond the school grounds. Local organizations reached out to collaborate with the school on community-building projects. Parents who had once seen each other as strangers now formed friendships, their children serving as bridges between them. Mrs. Thompson, in a heartfelt moment, approached Mr. Carter after the assembly. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking. "You didn't just teach my son. You taught me too." Mr. Carter smiled warmly. "That's the thing about learning. It never really stops." The journey had been challenging, but the results spoke for themselves. The school had become a beacon of hope and progress, a testament to what could happen when one person dared to make a difference. Years later, Jefferson Elementary School was barely recognizable from the tense, divided place it had once been. The school had become a symbol of progressive education, with other districts seeking guidance on how to replicate its success. At the heart of that transformation was Mr. Carter, whose story had become legendary not just within the school but throughout the community. Former students often returned to visit him, sharing how his lessons had shaped their lives. Emma, now a confident high school senior, credited Mr. Carter with helping her overcome her fear of public speaking. "You always believed in me," she told him one afternoon. That made all the difference. Lucas had become a leader on the student council, advocating for mental health awareness programs. "You taught me that leadership is about lifting others up," he said proudly. Even parents who had once protested Mr. Carter's presence now spoke of him with admiration. Mrs. Thompson, who had become a strong advocate for inclusive education, often shared her transformation story at parent meetings. "Mr. Carter didn't just change my son's life, he changed mine too," she admitted. The school's curriculum had evolved, incorporating more project-based learning and social-emotional development. Teachers embraced a culture of empathy and understanding, guided by Mr. Carter's pioneering methods. Beyond the school, the community itself had grown closer. Events like the Day of Understanding became annual traditions, drawing people together to celebrate diversity and connection. The once insular neighborhood had become a vibrant, inclusive place where differences were not just tolerated but celebrated. One sunny afternoon, the school held a special ceremony to unveil a new plaque outside the main entrance. It read, "In honor of Mr. Elijah Carter, whose dedication and compassion transformed our school and community." May his legacy inspire generations to come. As Mr. Carter stood before the plaque, surrounded by students, parents, and colleagues, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been difficult, but it had been worth every challenge. In his final address to the crowd, he spoke words that would stay with them forever. Education isn't just about filling minds with knowledge, he said. It's about opening hearts and building bridges between people. If we can teach our children to lead with empathy, courage, and understanding, then we've done our job. Not just as teachers, but as human beings. The audience erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. As the crowd began to disperse, Lucas approached Mr. Carter. "Will you ever write a book about all of this?" he asked with a grin. Mr. Carter chuckled. "Maybe someday. But for now, I'm happy seeing all of you write your own stories." Walking through the school grounds, past the mural of the tree with its message of growth, Mr. Carter knew that the seeds he had planted would continue to flourish long after he was gone. Because true education never ends. It grows, evolves, and leaves a legacy that changes the world, one student at a time.